Please be aware this will be a spoiler-filled discussion. Hello and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society, where we're ticking all the boxes and providing a minority perspective in popular internet discourse. I'm Tilly, my pronouns are she and her, and I lead the film discussions.
I'm Josh, my pronouns are he and him, and I lead the music discussions.
Today is a new film episode, as you will have seen. We're talking about Wes Anderson's latest feature, The French Dispatch, which is kind of falling into this like post-COVID wave of like returning auteur cinema. Like we
Cinema.
had Cinema. Yeah, we're getting Cinema back. I did have a moment when I sat down to watch this film of like, oh yeah, films are back.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this is crazy.
I think Shang-Chi really opened the floodgates. I'm not even joking. I think that film doing well has like completely made studios feel confident about releasing movies again.
Yeah, no. 100%. Like, which is,
Nolan couldn't do it with Tenet, but Shang-Chi could do it.
and that purely on a shit posting queer level, I'm very happy. Even if I saw Tenet and liked it, which I think I might do, just it is my role as a queer person to dunk on Tenet at every possible avenue. So
Go off.
yeah, haha. Just give it a brief introduction. This is an homage to, I guess, like,
They say journalism, but it's the New Yorker. It's a homage
yeah.
to the New Yorker.
Well, Wes Anderson, going into this, he's I sort of was expecting one of his films that is less sentimental. Essentially, I think there are kind of two sides to the director, and the best stuff with him is when those two sides interlink, which is
Okay.
this sort of very whimsical sentimentalism, fleshed out with like genuinely good characters and emotional arcs. And then there is the neurotic creative, who kind of builds these worlds in a very obsessive way.
That's interesting. 'Cause I kind of have a Wes Anderson dualism in my head as well. But
mm,
for me, it's
mm,
it's his adult films and his kid films. As in, like there's literally a scene in Royal Tenenbaums where I felt a bit sick afterwards because it was like it legit hit like a trigger place.
oh
Versus
no.
like the Fantastic Mr. Fox and Moonrise and Isle of Dogs, which I think are like comfortably kind of kid films. Not
Yeah.
not not films, not like kid films as in they're kiddie or for kids, but just like I could show this to a kid. Whereas I wouldn't feel comfortable
Yeah.
showing like Budapest to a 12-year-old.
No, or Life Aquatic, like
Mm.
things like that. No, I think that's completely fair. I just think something all those films do have in common is those like two sides. Like I think the friend we because we've talked about Wes on the podcast before. Yeah, we're buddies. We can call him Wes.
Talked about him twice.
Talked about him twice. Talked about him twice. Thing with Life Aquatic, that I think is I really I love that film, but I think what made it not quite hit in the way that the Fantastic Mr. Fox does is the disparity between those two elements.
Yeah.
You kind of have this very like you can tell that doing this homage to Jacques Cousteau's filmmaking, yeah, you can really get a sense of that like obsessive genius image that it's really easy to put on filmmakers like this.
Yeah.
Making that film, but I just think that but I think the emotional side of him, it's in that film kind of not neutered, but it doesn't quite raise to meet it in that same way. And I was expecting from the French Dispatch, obviously there's an inherent sentimentalism in paying homage in this way, but I was expecting more of this kind of like, it's hard to put into words, this sort of him seeking to encapsulate a time more in a sort of methodical way than as a very sentimental act, like some of his more kid films.
What's interesting about kind of Anderson's sentimentality is there's always kind of, in my opinion, an irony to it. There's a self-awareness there in terms of he's always nostalgic for eras he was not alive for. Like Moonrise
Yeah.
Kingdom is nostalgia for his like grandparents' era. You know, like he was not around for the times that Moonrise Kingdom is set on and based on. And I think some of that leaks into this film. I mean, a lot of the New Yorker writers that he's paying tribute to, would have had their heyday in the 60s and 70s
Yeah.
and 50s. I don't I I don't know if Wes Anderson was reading James Baldwin when he was 10 years old, but I kind of doubt it. Um, I definitely think that, again he deals with borrowed nostalgia a lot, and I do think that lends a sense of irony where they don't feel too like bleeding heart sentimental in the way that, say, Kevin Smith Twitter post about crying to Marvel films feels. There is a sense of
Yeah.
distance, I think, just to Anderson's sentimentality sometimes.
No, 100%. Uh, and I think here what's really weird is as I watched this film, I did feel this kind of alienation, really. I don't know. I found it quite hard to place this film in Wes Anderson's works. Uh, because there's this sort of contradiction going on where we're at a point where Wes Anderson has been around for such a long time. His style is so recognizable and but also developed. Like I feel like the sort of
Yeah, definitely.
idea of Wes Anderson is now almost in terms of the timeline of ideas, it almost has to enter like the post irony soon. It's been cultivated and spoken about and discussed for so long. Um, but I was watching it and seeing him tackle anthology film making for the first time. This was a weird like film to get from him, and I was
Mm.
watching it and yeah, I couldn't quite place it
Yeah.
uh, with him as a director, even though like I say, I could see all this stuff that is so him.
Yeah, I mean, I was so excited to talk to you about this because I saw this quite a while ago. So I watched it
Mm,
again a week or so ago to refresh my memory in it, and I have it pretty firmly in my head. And I was so
yeah,
excited to talk to you about it because I haven't really had proper conversations with anyone in my life about this film, and it feels kind of ineffable to me. Like I find it really hard to pin this film down and figure
yeah.
out like how I feel about it or what happened. Um, uh, in like an emotional sense. And I found the like online journalism surrounding this film quite frustrating and vague. Like I kept trying to
Yeah.
read kind of reviews or articles about the film to like someone to lay out a sort of thesis, and everything is either like telling you what the New Yorker writer influences are that
Yeah.
this film is building on, or saying the phrase, which I swear I've read at least 3 times, this is the most Wes Anderson-y Wes Anderson film yet. It's super
Yeah.
Wes Anderson-y. Just like vague statements about the general like aesthetic kind of milieu of the
Yeah.
film. And I was just like, for the love of God, could someone please tell me why they love this or like what it meant to them
Yeah,
or
no.
just anything tangible?
No, this is the problem with whenever a new Wes Anderson film comes out. There's this, whether you like him or not, this is from both sides of the argument. There is this reverence to the idea of him as a director. It's actually really hard to engage with people on his the actual like content of his films a lot of the time because I think more than any other auteur working, and I just do think like as sort of pretentious as I feel using that word just functionally, it's true. It's just it is the operative word. Like
Well, to settle any like audience kind of disgruntling at the word auteur, I would take that as a symbolic term of like the team of Wes Anderson. You know, in
yeah,
the same way that
yeah,
all these auteurs have, their favorite editor who makes all their films of them, and they're troupe of actors who they bring on, and you know, people who help them write. Like Jason Schwartzman is integral to like the Wes Anderson
No,
project. So like when we say auteur, like we acknowledge that it's not just this one dude. Like it is a team.
and
It's under the name of Anderson. Yeah.
also auteur kind of comes with it. It has the opposite, the not the opposite, but there's also the sort of other meaning auteur, which refers to their reception. Like auteurs are
Mm.
something we create as audiences. You know, we
Yeah.
like the way we group their films together and sort of essentialize the guiding intentions behind them. Like
Yeah.
I think that's
Which is why I
mm,
think directors like Michael Bay and Zack Snyder are so like revelatory to me because they are, in my opinion, they are auteurs, hands
yeah.
down. But they're good examples of like auteur as an operative phrase rather than kind of one of praise or you know reifying a director as a genius.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm glad you said that because I do think it is good to give context, like to how we're using that word. Because yeah, that's exactly how I intend it. Um, and yeah, it is just really hard to speak about him, especially online. Not that I'm like going in the forums or anything, but just like I'm 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 a sort of watcher online. I read things and whenever it comes to him, it's barren. Because yeah, there's just very little actual critique. It's all of it is so in the light of the filmmaker it's talking about. I think mainly just because the discussion around him has reached such a like it's just been around for so long and been so hegemonic that like it's impossible to escape the idea of him when you're talking about these things. But that's why I like talking about him here because I think we just get down to it, which yeah is I
Yeah,
think
definitely. I
important.
know what you mean about kind of the untouchable mystique of Wes Anderson. Like I in our private conversations, I've opened up to you and said, I do think Wes Anderson and his team are genius. Like
Yeah,
is incredible the language of cinema that in my opinion they have created. Like of the kind of babies of Godard and there's lots of Godard in this film, I think.
yeah,
And you know,
yeah,
French New Wave, I do think he's one of the most like beautiful voices to come out of that. Uh, 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 However, uh, I went into this film real arms crossed because I fucking hated Isle of Dogs. I think Isle of Dogs is a piece of shit. Um,
yeah,
uh, I think it's like Orientalist trash, and this kind of stuff had kind of come up in his previous films. I haven't seen it yet, but Darjeeling Limited, you know,
yeah,
famously is about kind of three white dudes going to India for spiritual enlightenment and kind of getting a version of that, you know, while kind of there's no prominent or deep Indian characters. Like Anderson has a tendency to use exoticism in his work. It's part of his borrowed nostalgia to place like cultures as backdrops to like
yeah,
his people. And Isle of Dogs was a real example of that. Point in case, like the dogs, you can hear what the dogs are saying. There's a joke about how a meta joke about how they've managed to record the dog speaking, but you can't hear what any of the Japanese people are saying because they're speaking Japanese and there's no subtitles.
yeah.
And that is like a specific aggressive way of just doing Orientalism as hard as you can. So I went into this like
Yeah,
real, but then also when you proposed this, I was like, I do kind of adore his style, and I want to like understand what his deal is.
yeah.
Um, uh, Figure out like why is he so enrapturing, even though I have these huge kind of cultural issues with the whiteness of a Wes Anderson film, the
No,
aggressive,
yeah.
you know, the type of whiteness that kind of puts other cultures in its background, if that makes sense. That's kind of the cross-armed how I went into this film.
No, no, completely. And he does it with everyone. I think it's more offensive in the cases of things like the Darjeeling Limited and Isle of Dogs, but he uses like people's thing, especially things that are considered by like sort of like white bourgeoisism, I guess, as like fanciful or deviant, I guess. Like in this film there's a lot of stuff with like sex workers. That's because especially in Owen Wilson's little segment,
Mm.
uh there's like this whole thing, there's this moment between him and Bill Murray's character, who's the editor of the sort of publication. He says, oh, what does he say? He says, I think Bill Murray just makes a remark like, because there's a lot of
Yeah,
reference to sex workers in it. He says like it's too much, and then he's like it's meant to
yeah, because
be.
he's kind of likening like Owen Wilson's trying to portray. This is like the first short story we get, trying to portray like the
Yeah,
authentic city of
we
we. And yeah, and Bill Murray kind of lists like the rats and the sex workers, and kind of as the list, part of the list of like undesirable traits that a
yeah,
location could have.
yeah, exactly. And it's
Yeah.
that, like you say with the Wes Anderson, there's an irony to it, but there is also still just that underlying like bourgeois sense of it all, like
Mm.
this feeling of like
Yeah.
stealing stories and making them for yourself. But I think, just to move on to getting into introducing our opinions to this, I just this is a it's a film I've really struggled. I saw this today,
Yeah.
and it's a film I've been struggling with. I went into this with, I think, really like clear expectations of what I thought it would be, and it did, and those were positive. I was looking forward to seeing this, and it
Mm.
met them. But at the same time, like the longer it went on, the more I found myself bored. To be honest, and I said before that I think Wes Anderson's a very obsessive filmmaker, both in how he makes things, but he also in like what he focuses on. Like I mentioned the Jacques Cousteau stuff from The Life Aquatic. I think he is one of those people who gets very deeply into a rabbit hole. And like I can picture having a conversation with them at like a party or just some sort of gathering, and they're really rambling about this thing they're like insanely into.
Yeah.
But he's always managed to twist it into a like compelling story or emotionally involving story that's gorgeous and fun. Uh, and here I just didn't feel that. It felt more like having that experience at a party and having the thing of like, wow, this person is just rambling at me. Like I didn't feel it. I think that was my
Mm.
ultimate problem with this film. Um, and what works for me about all Wes Anderson's other films is his style is so ridiculously emotionally evocative.
Mm.
Um, and that's not to say his style isn't here in full force, but there is just this layer missing. Uh, and I think part of it might be the structure of it. Just to get into the structure a little bit, I do think that the anthology structure just means that Wes Anderson's momentum is very contained, and there is this constant high level of energy. That means that the sort of exhaustion of it all just sets in, rather than like giving everything a bit of room to breathe. Uh, I don't know. That's just off the top of my head, but yeah. So it's just a film I'm struggling with, really.
Yeah, from the sounds of it, I definitely enjoy this more than you do. I think
Okay.
one thing about Wes Anderson films that I've thought about, and like, if anyone at home is, I consider myself neurotypical. If at home you think what I'm saying is uninformed, like, please comment, say something.
Mm.
But I have like lots, I have not lots, but I have like autistic friends who really love Wes Anderson. I do think his films, I do think kind of uh the autistic trait of like special interest really comes across in his films, like being so
Mm.
obsessed with like specific aesthetics or times. Um
Yeah,
or modes of storytelling, uh, I think is a big part of his films. So I can see how it's like a representation win,
that's really
right?
interesting
For that
about
type of
that.
film goer. And
Mm.
I think it kind of comes through in how his characters talk sometimes. Like there is a feeling there's not they're not like super socially easy, right? Like there's something very deliberate about all of his characters the way he speaks. I think it's
Yeah,
loosened a bit in this film, and that style has really grown on me. And I think that kind of the tight grip he has on the aesthetics of his films, you know, both wanting everything to be meticulously placed so that it's perfect, but also so many handheld camera moments, so much clear kind of like you are watching a movie moments, you
yeah,
know, uh,
yeah.
so so constructed, and I did pick up the Wes Anderson collection book, um, and there's a great bit in the introduction where they talk about how his film's about kind of creating these trying to create perfect worlds that are broken from the beginning. They're always going to fall apart, you know.
Mm.
And that is a metaphor of like, you know, growing up and realizing that the world is kind of inherently broken. And
Yeah.
I think uh, you get some of that in his films, like especially this film, you know, where the melancholy and the whimsy are basically uttered in the same register. Like a great moment in this film that's really like tonally jarring is when Tilda Swinton is in the first short story, the first like proper short story,
Mm.
is telling this tale about this you know great artist played by uh, Benicio
Benicio
del
del
Toro.
Toro.
Yep. And in the same register that she makes like the jokes about accidentally putting her own nude life picturing on the slideshow, or the satire that she's kind of regaling, she like steps forward closer to the camera and tells a story about how when Benicio's character like was sexually kind of aggressive towards her when when she was a student of hers, and it's said in the exact same register as she would say anything else, right? There's no
Yeah.
there's no feeling that this is especially traumatic. And I think that is part of like the built-in brokenness of his world, which has been commented upon. Um,
That's
so
really
I
interesting.
think creating this film of like three nicely, perfectly demarcated stories, these like nice Russian dolls, this is classic Wes Anderson style, but each
Mm.
one there's something like horrible and sick and sad that happens, and it's all framed around like the sad death of this editor, you know, who you know, is so generous and Bill Murray so loving. Uh,
Yeah.
that that Wes Anderson theme that runs throughout all the films, I thought came through really well here. I will talk a bit about dissonance, I think, and the kind of way this emotionally fails for me in some places. But I do think
Yeah.
the overall thing that is being given to me, I am into. And back to my like reservations politically, I was just super relieved to have like speaking non-white characters who were interesting and good. And
Yeah.
I could kind of leave that at the door a bit and just like enjoy and relax a bit, a little bit.
No, no, because yeah, I there is yeah a reservation with Wes Anderson films like we talked about that's hard to let go of sometimes, and it was nice to be able to this time. I, however, very briefly, I want to something political that bothered me about this film. Is a story that was Roebuck White's story, which is definitely evoking James Baldwin, in my
Mm,
opinion.
agree with that.
Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's just it's parallel. Like it's not even an evoking. Um, so that entire story is very focused around the police. And when it comes to the police's representation in films, especially with like procedurals and things like that, I am able to put my complete despise for that organization, like in any expression aside, um, and just sort of watch the silly thing happen because I know what I believe. It's not going to be changed by watching like cops solve crime. But when I don't know, when I feel like it's brought up the idea of the police as like a problematic institution, and makes some kind of, essentially arouses the problem with them. And this does kind of tie in with what you're saying of like these broken worlds, but it ties in more to just like a real life problem for me. um what yeah so what brings up problems me for this film is like James, not James, Roebuck Wright brings up the fact that when he was brought into, when he first arrived in Paris, he was, or in Ennui, rather. Sorry, don't know why I said Paris. When he first arrived in Ennui, he was thrown in jail for being gay. It's like heavily alluded to, and it's simply not dealt with. And I don't want like the film to pause and we have like a really serious scene where like he reconciles with the police, but it was just difficult. It more than difficult, I found it frustrating watching this story about like the antics of the police, and like how whimsically everything is presented, we've basically just had like the structural violence against gay people brought up and then sort of dismissed very, very quickly. So that was a real thing I had holding me back from, I think, what otherwise would have been my favorite segment. Yeah, go for it, dude. The more I think about it, the more this film's kind of a mess, because you do then there's like this emotional moment with this child, and I'm like, I don't give a fuck about this kid, man. Like this has been going, this sequence has been going on for 20 minutes, and this character, this kid and his dad have probably said 10 lines together total. Like, and I just, the more I think about this film, like the rest of this is, I keep, the word to describe this director and writer as well is intricate. And when I think like in his best films, there is this emotional pathos that has been so intricately designed and is so narratively cogent. It's incredible. And I think to see this film and just have, I just it pales in comparison because of moments like when the child and the father hug, and you know they shed tears. It's in an animated section,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and there is this real, like, I've had this moment of like, oh, I'm in a Wes Anderson film. I feel as if I should care, and I simply don't.
I
And
think what's striking though is I think sometimes he pulls it off in this film and sometimes he doesn't. So that moment of the kid crying at the dad, I agree with you. I didn't really care. But Jesus, Elizabeth Moss, like who in literally one scene we established was like this real logician, right? Kind of literary thinker, and was
mm,
always like the hard cut. We're gonna cut these papers, and Bill Murray's been the soft heart. No, it's fine. We can keep them. When she breaks down right at the end, after literally like maybe 5 minutes spending with Elizabeth Moss's character, that really got me. And she looks up and sees the no crying and literally just like stops herself from crying and like returns to the normal Elizabeth kind of brutalist presentation. That
yeah,
really emotionally worked for me. But I agree, the kid thing didn't work. I think for me, because this film is so hit and miss, and there's so many
yeah.
hits, I am more positive overall. But I see what you're saying.
One hit for me was, I would say, to be honest, the entire framework of Roebuck White on that talk show. I found that so compelling. The way he was speaking, I really enjoyed his performance. And I just think the entire way that character was performed was just really good, uh, and touching, and very genuine. He had a very sort of ironical affectation to him, but there was a real genuineness to him that is a lot like all of the other characters on this film. And normally I would say in a Wes Anderson film that would be someone doing like a Wes Anderson performance badly, but it really worked. I really think like he just comes across as a very genuine portrayal. I think the interplaying between his the way we see him now and then the black and white days of his youth when he just looks when his facial hair is different. Like I think it really this film really does show the passage of time very well. But what I would like to do is I would like to go through what hit for you because the I had a realization like sitting on the
Mm,
sofa half an hour ago and just that I wasn't thinking about the film at all.
okay.
And I just want to hear what worked for you and just
So I think the
come back at
whole
it with what I thought.
whole the whole frame narrative of Bill Murray, absolute banger. I really, really enjoy uh, the sequences of Bill Murray talking to every writers in between and like telling them what the best part of the story is and gleaning a little bits of their personality through those interactions.
Hmm.
Like the fact that the Jeffrey Wright character cut out the most emotional part of the story because he explicitly doesn't like sentimentality. And it is like this play on kind of like if you want to read Wes Anderson, it's like a post irony, new sincerity, David Foster Wallace kind of wave of director with kind of sincerity after we've decided that sincerity is bullshit.
Yeah.
Um, that's really interesting and good. Okay, and then the Owen Wilson story, absolute banger. I really love that montage. I
No, it was
agree with the
fun.
problematic elements he brought up, but can't deny Owen Wilson. And aesthetically, it's an example of like, hey, no other films look this good. And I
No.
feel the same way when I watch the other Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson. Like when I watch The Master, I'm like, yeah, there just aren't other American films that look this good
No.
from
No.
Hollywood. Even and that is just a complete marvel to me. I think the Benicio del Toro story, I thoroughly enjoyed. Um, Other than The Growling, it felt like if you look at each of his films as kind of experimentations with his style, kind of building on the Wes Anderson myth. Here, I think, as well as the black and white and the 2D animation, taking away color, which is his like main thing, really exciting when that started happening with the Benicio del Toro story. But also, like, I feel like Del Toro, he was experimenting with more like naturalistic dialogue, which was really interesting. And you
Mm.
get, in my opinion, like one of my favorite scenes in any Wes Anderson film, the um the scene where Del Toro tries to propose to the police officer who was in the James Bond movies.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and he's trying to tell her, trying to propose to her, and she's like, "I don't love you," and he's like, "How do you know that? Like already?" And it's this really
Yeah,
like gut
yeah.
punching, emotional. I love that. That whole story is great. Tilda Swinton's fucking hilarious as the art curator who keeps like adjusting her posture to return to the story. Um,
The twist of
Love it.
of the dialogue with the you don't love me seeing the play on it
Mm.
being instead of like how do you know you love me already this insane artist saying how do you know that you don't love me already like that's brilliant,
Yeah.
that is brilliant.
It's insanely good. And Adrian Brody, like, Anderson doing straight up satire with the Adrian Brody character of how, gross the kind of commercialization and marketing of art is. Felt like a point I could really get behind, but also just incredibly funny and good. The live tableaus that happen, where you can visibly see them like trying to hold still, was another great kind of you're watching a movie touch. Just like that whole thing is just
Yeah,
impeccable to me. So this is where we hit like a roadblock. I don't get the second story with Timothy
no,
Chalamet and
I
Frances McDormand.
agree,
I
I
do not
agree.
get it.
I was there watching like when the Francis like because so there's obviously a significant age difference between Timothy Chalamet and Francis McDormand, and like that's in the film as well. And when that happened, I was like,
Huh.
that's really odd. Like I was like, that's a really odd decision. Like that really did not seem to be where Francis McDormand's character was going because like Timothy
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's a sort of carefreeness to Chalamet's character, but when
Mm.
McDormand seemed very proper and everything, and when that happened, I was, and it just never went away. And then I honestly the more I think about that, I think that's the worst story. I think there's a lot of
It is
charm,
so. I think it's
but
really. Yeah.
emotionally, it's a fucking mess.
It
It's
sucks
a
because again,
mess.
aesthetically, I can't deny it. Like, especially in the theater, Jesus Christ, the scene when Chalamet and the other revolutionary girl are arguing over like whether or not they should have a picture of a revolutionary or a picture of a pop star, aka Jarvis Cocker's fictional character, on the
Yeah,
wall, and then he pulls her to the jukebox, plays a song, and then the walls of the restaurant slip away from them, and you see the
yeah,
night streets. That is so gorgeous. So
yeah.
I was just like aesthetically, I'm so blown away by that. But yeah, emotionally, I do not know what to do with this story. I guess like thematically, it's tying into kind of um the overt role of the writer. Kind of in the third story with Jeffrey Wright, you have someone who rejects emotional writing but can't help being emotional in his own writing. And here you have a woman who wants to be have authorial distance or journalistic distance,
Mm.
um, but falls in love with one of the people in the writing. Um, uh, I can't pair this theme. I can't thread this theme very well into the first story. Again, I find this one really hard to holistically kind of have a thesis on, because it's so yeah, like you said, all over
Yeah,
the place. But yeah, I don't get the McDormand romance with
it's
Chalamet. Um,
and
it's
then
really weird.
I think you do genuinely get a couple moments of Wes Anderson playing like breaking his own style, like those
Mm,
neon shots of him
mm,
on the back of the scooter. They really didn't work for me. They looked really weird and really out of place, and it was coming to the end of this story, and I could feel it wrapping up. I could, we, with the writer character telling them to
yeah.
go and make love, and I could feel it wrapping up, and I was it was a cheap ending. It
It
felt like I was just this has
yeah
come from nothing. There's no
yeah
build up. There's no like clever intricacies that have brought them to this point. What is happening?
Yep,
Um,
I, I
and
I I agree. What did you think about even the way the brokenness is manifesting there? I guess both of Chalamet's untimely death and this tale of the kid who kills himself when they're off, like I think at war boot camp and
oh yeah,
thinking about their futures. Like, did those do anything for you? Because I don't know if they
no,
worked for
they
me.
were they just they felt like there were Anderson's movies are full of detours, and
Mm,
what's great about them is when you realize you spent 15 minutes in what was once like a one line throwaway,
mm,
um and then they wonderfully come back to put everything back together, and suddenly you have a complete reinvention of everything you had established in terms of the script at this point.
mm.
And it just was not that payoff with any of them. Like that sort of mock theater scene,
Yeah. It.
it ended, and I
Uh,
was so
yeah.
confused. There's just and this is I brought up before
Mm,
how I don't think the momentum of Anderson's filmmaking carries well across anthology
mm.
filmmaking, and I just don't think it gives him the breathing room for that intricacy that I that I think he should be celebrated more for, because obviously
Mm.
he gets celebrated for the intricacy of his visuals all the
Yeah.
time. But I think what really makes Anderson work for me is how incredibly well tied together everything is, and it just didn't have that.
Yeah, I guess one last thing about the Chalamet story is there was a real conflict in that part. I think this film struggles with crossing the wires between like the emotional punching bits and like the quirky haha fun
Mm.
action bits. Whereas the film like Moonrise Kingdom, the whimsy parts of that films are completely thematically built into what it's saying about love and childhood and adults being broken. Whereas here, like it kind of just really, it's really modal. Like it just we're doing a fun
Yeah.
chase scene, and now we are crying, and now
Yeah.
we are doing making fun of like I guess the '68 French student revolutions,
Yeah.
and now we're gonna reflect on kind of first love, and but there is a moment. there's these moments, right, that aesthetically I'm so like blindsided. Like when Chalamet is doing this wrap-up monologue, and Chalamet's great in this film. I think Chalamet under the hands of Greta Gerwig and um, Wes Anderson. That's the Chalamet I like. Okay, but that aside, he's given this monologue, they're comparing Frances McDormand and the young woman who he's decided to leave with. I can't remember the actress's name right now. Um, and there's this like two shot right of them both getting ready in the morning and how they're both different and how he like loves these little things about both of them.
Yeah,
And
that was
it's
brilliant.
playing the Alexandra Desplat, music, Wes Anderson's very own Johnny Greenwood, this gorgeous music and these amazing shots, and them riding off on the motorcycle, which I did enjoy, and like him in the woman dormitory with his new girlfriend, kind of like being intimate with each other, and it's just like I was like feeling emotional, but also I was like I don't care about any of these characters,
Yeah.
but it got me, and that's where I'm torn with that. This whole film, and but mainly that second story, because I do like the other two stories quite a bit. But that second story, I was like, man, he's still got that Wes Anderson magic, even if writing wise, I think the story fails a bit.
Yeah, and to begin wrapping up, um I think that was just my difficulty with this film was I've I think it's quite affirming for me really was because I started off with Wes Anderson as actually really quite skeptical because I find the visible constructive thing is on the verge of really not working for me. And at this point, I've been won over from my skepticism of that particular thing of him. Uh, but now I still don't have an underlying love for his filmmaking in the same way that I do with someone like Paul Thomas Anderson where I don't think it exists, but were there to be a lesser Paul Thomas Anderson film, I think I would be devastated by,
Oh, it's
you
Inherent
know,
Vice. That's what it looks like, by the way.
yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. But I love it. Yeah, no. And I just um so so I, I found myself in these scenes that were constantly asking emotion of me, and I was so cold. And I do think, like, I'm happy those emotional scenes worked for you. I'm happy you got something out of this film, but I do think there is a like shallowness to this film, emotionally. I really wish that there was more of a like conventional, less anthological, if that's a word, narrative. um, because I think I would really, really be into a film that was uh, trying to do all of this, trying to be one way or the other. I
Mm.
wouldn't really mind a less sentimental film about this subject matter. I like it when Wes Anderson gives us a new world, and a world that only he could be obsessed with, maybe, and shows us why we should love it. And he just really fails with this, and
Mm.
I think, that's not just like his filmmaking really is wonderful here. Um, but after the first hour with him, when you're not emotionally involved, I find myself so exhausted.
Mm.
Um, but ultimately, I think I'd give this. Oh, you know what? You know what? It's Wes Anderson. like, like,
See how they mess come up, boy.
like you'll see it or you won't see it. I like this is just. I'm not going to give this one a recommendation at all because this is simply a film from a director, one of which that I like, but it's just one of those ones that didn't work for me.
I'd give this very decent recommend. I
Okay.
enjoyed this quite a bit. I really like how you went around not liking this because I'm extremely tired with the critique of Wes Anderson of like all of his films are the same. Why do the characters talk like that? Is symmetry that interesting? It's like, okay, get over like he has visual motifs. Like, let's get over that and actually talk
Yeah,
about like what's going on. So I really appreciated the angles from which you dislike this film, if
thank
that means
you.
anything to you.
It
I
does mean something to
personally
me.
viewing this as an anthology film compared to like other anthology films like I guess VHS, the horror anthology films of that ilk. If we're gonna like rate it alongside other anthology films, I'm sure I can't think of a better one right
The
now. I'm
Ballad
sorry.
of Buster Scruggs.
I
That's a
haven't seen it yet. I'm sure it exists. Coen Brothers, do your thing. But I this is 3 out of 4 of the stories here. I think are total bangers, and I really like the
Mm.
framing of all of the stories with the Bill Murray scenes. So like
You
I
go,
really,
girl.
I dug it. I enjoyed it. I agree that emotionally it does not land those punches like that. The way he writes the chef's words about eating the poisoned food was kind of like unmemorable and inelegant in a way that doesn't hit as hard as say in Moonrise Kingdom when she comments that I always thought orphans were more interesting. I think your life is just better and more full. And he says, I love you, but you have no idea what you're talking about. Like that fucking sticks in my head, and that's really good. And
Yeah.
I think you've still got lightning in you. Great lines, great lines. I do think there's something muddled emotionally in this film. But overall, I can't deny it. Like I think aesthetically, it's another Marvel, and it's not like offending me horribly like Isle of Dogs did.
Yeah.
So it's another great Wes Anderson film for me.
Awesome.
Probably like mid tier, but I really enjoyed this. Please
Good. I'm
recommend.
happy you enjoyed it. I'm really happy you enjoyed it. Uh, what are we talking about next week?
Next week we are gonna be discussing Joanna Newsom's fourth and most recent album, uh, titled Divers. And that will conclude our Joanna Newsom retrospective until she releases another album.
Hell
So
yeah.
so awesome.
I'm sad to see it go.
Yeah.
Even if I'm, not her like biggest fan, I've
Mm.
loved talking about her. She's
Yeah.
always been fun to talk about.
And this will be the first album with music videos directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. So we're entering the Haim era of Joanna
Yo,
Newsom.
more Paul Thomas Anderson content.
Ooh, sneaking in my
I'm
special interest every single week.
the grind simply does not stop.
There we go.
Okay, thank you very much for listening. Check us out anywhere we are. All the links are below. Thank you. Goodbye.